You're nothing to me, you hear? We ain't even family. My son, Terrell, said those words slow, almost lazy, without even looking up from his phone. You know, when a person yells, it's easier to just shake it off. But a cold sentence like that cuts you deep, like a dull, rusty blade. I was holding a thin envelope with the test results, and my fingers were shaking, not out of fear, but from some sickening self-disgust. It felt like 25 years of my life had just been neatly crossed out by a stranger's pen. Hello? My name is Darnell Ransom. I'm 58 years old. I'm a master machinist at a small manufacturing plant on the edge of Detroit. My whole life has been grinding metal, shavings, and grease. I worked double shifts so that the fridge was always full, the lights stayed on, and my boy could get a proper education. And right now, I want to tell you about the thing that ripped my family apart. It was neater than any explosion, but it didn't leave a single visible piece of shrapnel. To be honest, sometimes I still catch myself thinking, this is all some bad TV movie, not my real life. The story started pretty ordinary. A couple of months ago, a new engineer came to the plant. Young guy, fancy sneakers, wearing a watch worth more than my old Ford pickup. At lunch, everyone was talking about these genetic tests. You spit in a tube, send it off, and they tell you where your ancestors came from, what diseases you might get. I waved it off, but he joked, Darnell, let's get you one. Maybe we'll find you some family from Europe. Everyone laughed, but that evening, I couldn't shake the idea. See, nobody in our family really knew our roots. My father passed away young. My mother worked in the cafeteria and said her parents were from the deep south. But after that, the trail went cold. Suddenly, I got curious. What if there really were people out there with my last name I'd never heard of? Plus, there was this small, nagging feeling I'd been hiding from myself. For a long time, I'd caught myself wondering if Terrell was truly mine. Not legally, of course, but the way he looked, the way he walked, the way he'd looked down on me since he was a teenager. Back then, I blamed it on the generation gap. Everybody fights with their kids, right? When I was his age, I was juggling odd jobs and getting ready to join the military. He was glued to his phone, arguing about the quality of life, telling me I was stuck back in the 90s. Sometimes he'd drop lines like, "You don't understand normal life." And I'd have to go into the kitchen, pour myself some strong iced tea, and count to 10 so I didn't say something I'd regret. There was always this invisible wall between us. I decided not to tell Candace, my wife. She would have just sighed and said, "Darnell, what foolishness. You should be replacing that old refrigerator instead." So, one weekend, I just ordered the kit. The little box arrived a few days later. I picked it up at the CVS by the counter, slid it into a bag between bread and some cold cuts, so nobody would get nosy. At home, when everyone went to their rooms, I locked myself in the kitchen. I read the instructions carefully, spat into the clear tube like an idiot, sealed the envelope, and drove it to the UPS store. I did it like a man pushing a pointless button, just because it was there. A couple of weeks went by, and I even forgot about the whole thing. At work, it was all shifts. At home, the usual routine. Candace watched her talk shows in the living room. Terrell came home late from his manager job at the big consulting firm out in Southfield, and he looked at me like I was a distant acquaintance. That day, everything lined up strangely. I got home early because my foreman let me go. The company sent me a text. The results were ready in my online profile. I sat down at the old computer in the dining room, where the shelf with Terrell's school awards still sat. He'd moved them out of his room years ago, but Candace wouldn't let me take them down. I logged in and opened the page. At first, there were charts, percentages by region. I wasn't too interested in that. Then my eye caught a line with a simple explanation. Your profile shows no parental linkage match with the specified user, Terrell Darnell Ransom. I didn't get the meaning right away. I read it again, then a third time. My chest went hollow, like someone had pulled a plug. I was staring at the screen like a fool. Just then, I heard the lock click in the hallway, followed by the shuffle of sneakers. Terrell walked in, tossed his keys onto the table, and walked past me without even saying hello. He smelled of expensive cologne and cigarettes mixed with coffee. "Terrell, wait up," I called, not recognizing my own voice. He stopped, turned slowly, and glanced at me, then at the monitor. "What now?" he asked, sounding like I'd been annoying him since birth. Like an idiot, I spun the screen toward him, not even sure why. The words caught in my throat. He stepped closer, scanned the lines, and smirked. "Oh, so you decided to play. Who's related to who?" He looked at me intently, without a shred of confusion or shock. It says," my hands were damp, "that we don't match. You understand?" He looked straight at me, totally calm, not an ounce of surprise. Then quietly, almost tiredly, he said the words I'd already heard. "Like I said, you're nothing to me, so let's not make a big deal of it, okay? If he had punched me, it would have been easier." Instead, I just sat there, in my old chair, listening to the kettle click in the kitchen, hearing Candace shuffle by in her slippers and realizing that right then, my life was unraveling. The worst part wasn't the words on the screen. It was the fact that his face showed no hint of surprise. It was like he had known it all along. He turned around and went into his room as if the conversation was over. I sat for several minutes more, my fingers digging into the armrests, listening to his keyboard clicking behind the wall. One thought kept circling in my head. If this is true, then who is he to me? And who am I? But you know, the most painful thing wasn't the test results. It was the whisper deep inside me. You always knew it. I didn't know where to start. Should I turn off the computer and pretend nothing happened? Or should I go to Candace and dump everything on her at once? I stood up and walked down the hall. Out of habit, I glanced in the mirror. Gray face, circles under my eyes, a spot of machine oil on my t-shirt. Some father I am. To understand the blow, you have to know how I lived before this. I'm an old school kind of guy. Work first, ask questions later. After the military, I landed at the plant, starting as a mechanic, and eventually becoming the shop foreman. We live in a regular brick apartment building, a 3-bedroom Candace's aunt left us. I poured half my life savings into that place. Replaced the wiring, ran the pipes, laid the flooring myself. I always figured, if the house works, the family is solid. I met Candace at a community center dance. I was 23, she was 20, studying at the community college to be an LPN. She was a laugher with dimples, but stubborn as a mule. I looked at her and thought, with this woman, I'll have a normal life. No crazy schemes, no debt, no running around. We got married fast, and almost immediately, she got pregnant with Terrell. I worked 12-hour shifts, covered for others, took night work, so I wouldn't be empty-handed when he was born. I remember hauling that disassembled crib home from the store. My back ached, but inside, I was singing. I truly believed that's how it would be. I'd work, my wife would be home, and our child would grow up and respect his father. Terrell was born early one morning. They took Candace to the hospital across town, the one that had all the new equipment. They wouldn't let me into the delivery room. I stood in the corridor that smelled of bleach, bad cafeteria food, and other people's sweat, staring at the closed door. A nurse came out. "Congratulations, Pop," she said. "It's a boy. Everything's fine." I handed her a chocolate bar. She waved me off, but took it. Candace and the baby were discharged a few days later. I showed up with an empty car seat, bought with my last few dollars. There was a crowd on the steps. Balloons, flowers, shouting hooray. They handed me the bundle. The tag on his wrist read Terrell Ransom, male. I cried like a fool, kissing that tiny elbow, never once thinking to check anything. For the first few years, I never doubted. Little Terrell would reach for me, grab my beard, and "Daddy" was one of his first words. I'd come home after a shift, and he'd run down the hall in his pajamas, flying into my arms so hard it took my breath away. We built blocks together on the living room rug. I read him books about planes, took him to the local park, and rode the old carousel with him. It all felt logical. Yeah, money was tight. Yeah, Candace sometimes grumbled that I spent all my time fixing the house instead of taking a vacation. But we were a family. The first cracks appeared when he went to school. Even then, it was clear Terrell wasn't like me. He quickly grasped computers, English, and math, asking teachers questions they couldn't answer. I was proud, sure. But next to him, I felt like a heavy, noisy old tractor next to a brand new import car. By 7th grade, he started demanding a branded phone like everyone else, expensive sneakers, and designer hoodies. I explained I couldn't afford it, and he'd roll his eyes. "Dad, it's embarrassing, don't you get it?" Gradually, our talks turned into negotiations. I'd talk about work, about being tired, about doing it all for you. He'd reply in a quiet, weary voice, "You chose that life. I didn't ask to be born in this dump." Candace usually sided with him. "He's right. You don't understand. Times are different. Kids have to keep up." I'd clench my teeth and head out for another side gig, fixing someone's washing machine in the evening to cover part of their demands. When Terrell finished high school, Candace and I scraped together some savings to help him get into a business program at the state university. He quickly found an office internship and then landed a job at a big downtown firm. On one hand, I was thrilled. The boy was standing on his own 2 feet. On the other, I felt him drifting further away. At family dinners, he wouldn't talk about his life. He'd just wave it off. "Dad, you wouldn't be interested. It's a completely different world." I'd try to joke, asking what kind of world that was, and he'd smile in a way that made me want to sing through the floor. In all those years, he never once truly came to me for advice, or help with money, or just a signature on a document. But never once did he sit down and say, "Dad, I have a problem. Help me figure it out." Sometimes at night, I'd go out to the balcony, sit on the old stool, stare into the dark yard, and think I just didn't know how to be a father. In our family, we didn't discuss feelings. My father quietly brought home his paycheck and yelled when I came home late. And now, when this test showed that scientifically there was nothing between us, all my guilt suddenly mixed with something else. A cold, stark suspicion. I went back to the kitchen. Candace was taking a baking tray of roasted chicken out of the oven. The air was thick with the smell of meat and spices. She looked at me and immediately narrowed her eyes. "Darnell, what's wrong with you? You look like you just got hit over the head." I just sighed, poured myself some water, and for the first time in years, I wondered if the person walking next to me knew why my son had so calmly said, "You're nothing to me." Candace put the tray on the table. The steam hit my face, mixed with the smell of garlic and burnt oil. I looked at the meat and thought, how strange. The house, the food, the familiar plates, my mug with the faded plant logo. But inside, nothing is the same. I sat down, ran my hand over the vinyl tablecloth with the peeling pattern, and decided I couldn't wait any longer. If I kept quiet now, I'd never speak up. "Candace, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She tensed immediately, gripping the back of a chair, looking at me with suspicion. "Is it about money again, Darnell?" I'm tired." "Not about money," I interrupted. "It's about Terrell." She paled a little, though she tried to look merely tired. She sat opposite me, tucking her feet under the chair. "What about him? Did you two fight again?" I pulled out my phone, opened the results page, and placed it between us. I didn't even want to look at it myself, but I had to show her. I took this genetic test, for ancestors, for health, just out of curiosity. My throat tightened. I coughed. "It says here that Terrell and I have no match. None." She read it silently, at first, her eyes running over the lines like a check register. Then, for some reason, she asked, "Are you sure it's about him?" "Who else?" I pointed to his name. "Terrell Darnell Ransom. Our son." Candace flinched, as if slapped. For a second, I thought she would cry, but instead she leaned back and gave a strange, humorless smile. "Well, of course," she said softly. "Of course, this is how it would come out. Through some spit in a tube." "What are you talking about?" A chill ran down my spine. "Candace, I'm asking you seriously. What does this mean?" She stopped, walked to the window, and back, twisting the corner of a dish towel until it almost ripped. I watched the back of her head and suddenly remembered a completely different Candace. Young, in a white shirt, hair down while holding a tiny pink bundle in the hospital room and whispering, "Look, Darnell, his nose, just like yours." I believed her every word back then. "Things happen," she started, looking away. "They could have made a mistake with these tests of yours. Do you believe every website now?" "I believed you for 25 years, I burst out. "And I believed that hospital in the tag on his wrist. What was it? Ransom, Terrell, male. I remember it word for word. And now they're telling me he's a stranger. Explain." Candace turned sharply. Her eyes flashed with anger instead of tears. "What am I supposed to explain, Darnell? Maybe you're not you. Maybe you got amnesia in the military." "Don't play games," I said wearily. "I know you. When you lie, the left corner of your mouth twitches. It's twitching so hard I can see it from here." She took a step back, leaned against the refrigerator. For several seconds, she just breathed heavily, then sighed. "You want the truth? You can't handle it." "Try me," I replied, feeling my fists clench. Instead of the truth, she suddenly started talking about general things. How life happens, how hospitals are chaotic, how we've lived a good life anyway. I listened to the nonsense and realized she was avoiding the issue, just like she always did when she was scared. It was the same way she avoided talking about those strange late-night phone calls when Terrell was little, when I was covering shifts to pay for his stroller. and she was delayed at a friend's. I had pushed the thoughts away then, so I wouldn't seem like a jealous fool. "Did you leave the room that day?" I asked abruptly. She blinked. "What day? The day we were discharged? Or before? You said they moved you to another room." Candace sat down as if her legs gave out. "They moved me," she admitted. "They said they needed the space for 24 hours. They put me in another room with some other woman. There was construction, the smell of paint, I barely remember." "And you didn't look at the tag?" I practically growled. "Not his weight, his length, anything?" "Darnell, where were you?" she finally snapped. "You were standing in the hallway, throwing chocolate bars and car keys around, and I was lying there on medication. Nurses were rushing back and forth, shouting that we were in the way. They just brought me a baby. Was I supposed to count his fingers and demand a DNA test right there?" She finally cried for real, covering her face with her hands. It didn't make me feel better. Tears didn't explain anything. I stood up, paced the kitchen, and stopped by the door. "Answer me one thing, honestly," I said softly. "Did you ever doubt he was ours? Even once in all these years?" She froze. The sobbing seemed to be cut off mid-word. Candace slowly took her hands away from her face and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I thought about it," she whispered once. Those two words hit harder than any scream. My mouth went dry. A couple of months after we were discharged, she stared at the table. Another woman came into the room when we were getting ready to go home. I vaguely remember her, like a shadow. She asked about the tags, and then I just pushed it away. I decided I was just being hysterical. "Why didn't you tell me? What would you have done?" Candace gave a bitter laugh. "You worshipped that hospital, those doctors. You would have told me I was crazy." I looked at her and realized our entire normal life was built on brushed aside tags, someone's inattention, and her fear of admitting the truth. And deep inside, another thought began to form, a truly terrifying one. If there was a mistake in that bleach-smelling corridor, or something worse, it meant my real son was walking around somewhere in the world. I barely slept that night. I lay on my side of the bed, listening to Candace quietly sobbing into her pillow, feeling less like a husband or a father, and more like a ghost in my own house. Her words about the other woman in the room, the construction, the tags, they kept spinning in my head. The more I reviewed the details, the clearer it became. If I left things as they were, I'd go crazy. I needed facts, not her hazy memories. When the alarm went off in the morning, I already knew what I would do. It wasn't a heroic plan, just the first conscious step in my life that wasn't for the family in general, but for my own understanding of who I was and where my child was. I didn't go to the plant that day. I called my foreman and mumbled something about high blood pressure. He grumbled about my age, but let me off the shift. Candace walked around the kitchen, silent as a shadow, avoiding my gaze. Terrell left without breakfast, slamming the door like a hotel guest. I put on my old jacket, shoved a worn notepad and a pen in my pocket, and left without explaining anything. The hallway smelled of a neighbor's pot roast and laundry detergent. The elevator was stuck again, so I walked down, counting the steps, just to keep my mind busy. I found the hospital online the night before. It had changed its name long ago, replacing the old state title with a fancy word like perinatal, but the address was the same. As I drove, I remembered that first day. I'd sped there in my rusty car, my heart pounding with joy and fear. I remembered carrying the bag of diapers, the cheap Amib aftershave smell from the other fathers, the shouting behind the doors. Now everything was different. The lobby had posters about natural births. Young girls sat behind monitors at the registration desk. Instead of peeling paint, there were smooth wall panels. But inside me, everything still smelled of that same bleach from the past. "Excuse me," I said to the woman behind the glass. "I need the head administrator or whoever is in charge of the archives. It's an important, old issue." She looked over her glasses. "What exactly is this about? A discharge summary? A record?" I fidgeted with my hat. "It's about the possible mix-up of a baby, 25 years ago." Even through the glass, I could see her face change. The smile vanished. Her eyes became guarded. "Hold on," she said, and disappeared into the back. I waited a long time. I sat on a hard plastic chair, watching young women with round bellies walk past the door, thinking how few of them ever considered that something might go wrong here. They all believed in the system, the white coats, the paperwork, just like I did once. Fragments flashed in my mind. A nurse with thick fingers slowly writing a name on a tag. Candace being wheeled away. A stranger's shout in the corridor. "Where did you take my baby?" Back then, I believed it was hysteria. Now, I wasn't so sure. Finally, they called me into an office. Behind the desk sat a man in his 60s, neat, in a white coat, with the look of someone used to complaints and hysterics. "Have a seat," he nodded. "I'm Dr. Elias, the department head. The girl said you have an old issue." I sat down, placed the notepad on the desk, and squeezed my hands to keep them from shaking. "Dr. Elias," I began, "my son was born here 25 years ago. Name is Ransom. My wife is Candace. I recently took a genetic test." I paused, and it turns out, based on the analysis, he is not my biological son. He didn't look surprised or twitch an eyebrow. He just leaned forward slightly. "And you believe a child may have been switched in our facility?" he calmly summarized. "I don't think anymore. I'm afraid," I answered honestly. "My wife remembers another woman in the room, being moved. Construction. I want to know if there's any chance of pulling the old records." He sighed, opened a thick file folder on his desk, and pulled out a printed sheet. It was clear he'd done this before. "Officially," Dr. Elias began, "all cases of child swapping, if they exist, are handled through the police and courts. We only keep archives for a limited time. Then some documents are transferred to the city fund. But," he lowered his voice slightly, "sometimes we keep duty logs, by date, weight, and time of birth." "That's enough for me," I said, "any thread at all." He sent a nurse to the back room dictating the approximate date I'd given. I had named the day Terrell was born almost without hesitation. It was that seared into my mind. While we waited for the logs, Dr. Elias suddenly asked, "Does your son know?" I smiled, but it came out crooked. He was the first one to tell me to my face that I was nothing to him. "You don't forget that. I understand," he said quietly. For the first time, something human, not just professional, flashed in his eyes. The nurse brought in a stack of old, thick bush ledgers that smelled of dust and old ink. She pinched her nose, but my heart skipped a beat. It was the same smell as then, 25 years ago, just without the bleach. The doctor spread the log and began flipping through the dates, mumbling. I leaned so close, I was almost breathing down his neck. "Here," he finally said. "Your day." The page had lines for time of birth, room number, mother's name, gender, weight, and length. I saw the name Candace Ransom. Next to it was neatly written, "Boy." along with the numbers for weight and length. And right below it was another, almost identical line with a different last name at the same time for the same gender. 2 women, 2 boys, born almost at the exact same moment. They were right next to each other, Dr. Elias muttered. See? Same room. Only a few minutes apart in time. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? I asked. He closed the log and looked at me with a long, heavy gaze. It means, theoretically, a mistake was possible, he said slowly. Practically, you'll have to confirm everything officially and be prepared. This might drag out things you don't even realize now. I left the office with a photocopy of the log page in my hand. On the paper, 2 last names stood side by side, ours, and another, a stranger's, or maybe my real one. For the first time, the word mix-up stopped being a scary fantasy and became something real, almost tangible, like the paper I clutched on the drive home. When you say baby swap, it sounds like some crazy news story. Until you're holding a paper with a stranger's name next to your own. I got home with the photocopy folded in quarters, like a secret note, and couldn't bring myself to open the door right away. Some neighbor in the building was frying something with onions. The smell hit me, dragging me back to domestic reality, while the proof that our family reality was cracking lay in my pocket. Finally, I turned the key. Candace was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, but her eyes showed the tea had long gone cold, leaving only cooled water and a fog in her head. "Well?" she asked, not even waiting for me to take off my jacket. I silently put the copy on the table. The sheet shook as her fingers reached for it. She stared for a long time, reading the names, and suddenly whispered, "Is this her? The woman?" "Which woman?" I sat across from her. "The last name." Candace touched the line below ours. She was the one who came into the room, asking the nurse if the babies had been mixed up. I remember she was shaking. They took her into the hall and rushed us out. I thought she was crazy. I looked at the 2 last names, one beneath the other, and realized this was no longer paranoia. This was someone's actual life, written in a duty log. "So this is it," I said, trying to grasp some logic. "There are 2 women, 2 boys. One is Candace Ransom. The other is—" I spoke the stranger's name aloud. Lauren Vaughn. It felt heavy on my tongue. They were in the same room, born almost at the same time. One had doubts. 25 years later, my son is officially not related to me. You had suspicions. What other piece of the puzzle do we need? Candace was silent, just gripping the paper so hard it nearly tore. I saw her shoulders tremble. "Darnell, she began, but I raised my hand. "No excuses right now. I just need to know if you're ready to go all the way." "All the way to what?" "Officially. The next step is through proper DNA tests and legal paperwork. Terrell's test, yours, mine. Finding this second family, and testing them too." When you say it out loud, you suddenly realize it's not just about biology. Behind every test are fates, habits, names on a license, and photos in albums. I knew that if I dug deeper, we couldn't go back to living as we did before. Yeah, there are doubts, but at least we're all together at the dinner table. There would be no turning back. But what if— Candace stared out the window. "What if it turns out he's not ours? What then? He still lived his life with us." "That can't be erased," I said grimly. "But somewhere out there is a boy, a man, 25 years old, who was supposed to grow up with me, and someone else raised him. You can choose to ignore that. I can't." That evening, I tried to talk to Terrell. He came home late, smelling of expensive cologne and a restaurant. We need to have a serious talk about something, I said, meeting him in the hall. He slid his eyes over me like I was a coat rack. I already said everything, he cut in. You're nothing to me. The blood test confirmed it. Let's skip the family drama. It's not that simple. I clutched the photocopy, but didn't hand it over. There's reason to think the hospital messed up. There's a second family. The same situation. Another boy born at the same time. We need to do a proper, official test at a lab. All three of us. He smirked, looking at his phone. Are you serious? You want to play the cheesy, mixed up at birth TV drama? At almost 60? I want to know the truth, I repeated. And you should, too. I don't owe you anything. His voice hardened like glass. I grew up in this apartment. Yeah. You paid for food, yeah, but I never asked for this childhood. If it turns out we're strangers, consider it fate, giving us a chance to go our separate ways nicely. That's when something inside me snapped. Nicely? I repeated. For 25 years, I carried this apartment, your college, your shoes, your classes. You wore my name. What kind of nicely is that, Terrell? He shrugged. The money can be calculated. He tossed back. Want to make a list? I'll send you the money when I get promoted again. But I'm not digging up the past now. I have my own life. I caught myself looking at him almost as if he were a strange man who had accidentally walked into my house and was lecturing me. I couldn't find anything of myself in his face anymore. Even the familiar curve of his brow looked foreign. Maybe that's how the mind works. As soon as you know the analysis says he's not yours, your perception adjusts, and everything familiar about him disappears. Fine, I forced out. Since you don't want it to participate, I'll start without you. He just snorted. Good luck. That night, I sat in the kitchen with my notepad, the one I usually used for listing spare parts. In a different handwriting, I wrote the name of the second woman, her middle name, and the date. I underlined, circled, and figured out where to begin. Searching social media, calling the hospital, using contacts. The more I wrote, the clearer I realized this wasn't just about finding out. It was a full-blown investigation. I, a master machinist who fixed metal his whole life, was about to piece together his own fate, based on faded records and someone else's memories. And there truly was no turning back. By morning, I knew which thread to pull. The second woman's last name was circled so hard the pen almost ripped the paper. I sat in the kitchen with my phone, feeling, for the first time in a long time, not just like a lost father, but a man doing something. I typed the last name into a search engine, added the first name, the city. A lot of junk came up, but a few matches immediately snagged my attention. A rare last name, the same year of birth as Candace. If there was a boy, he's also 25 now. Where is he? Who calls him son? Candace paced nervously around me like a cat. She'd pour tea and forget to drink it, or open the fridge for no reason. Who are you looking for? She finally asked. Her, I answered shortly. The one who came into the room that day. And then what? You'll drive to her house and say, Hello, I might have your child? And what do you propose? Pretending none of this exists? I looked at her. We've been pretending for 25 years. It worked out great. After a couple of hours of searching, flipping through pages, old announcements, and social media, I found the right combination. The last name, the woman's first and middle name, matching the log. And a photo next to it. A woman my age in front of a suburban home, and next to her, a young man. Tall, in a business coat, carrying a briefcase. Almost my height, but he held himself like the world owed him something. In the comments, someone had written, Our Ethan, best graduate. Family pride. My heart stuttered. Here he is, and possibly the one I should have been tossing up in the air in our living room. But he was standing in a suburban driveway next to a big black SUV. I stared at the screen for a long time, zooming in and out of the photo. His face had nothing of Terrell. Different features, different jawline. But in the way he pressed his lips together, I suddenly saw something painfully familiar. My stubbornness. The same stubbornness I used to argue with my boss about working on a holiday. A strange feeling, like looking at your own reflection, but in a stranger's clothes. You found them? Candace peered over my shoulder. When she saw the photo, she gasped. He looks so much like you. Don't say that, I asked. Until we prove it. He's just a stranger's son. I wrote down the address that glowed in the profile. Some kind of subdivision outside Detroit, with a fancy name. It also listed where the young man, Ethan, worked, some consulting firm downtown. It all looked like another world, one I never would have touched if it hadn't been for this damn test. By evening, I decided to call. I found the landline number listed on the website for their family's small construction business. I turned the phone over and over in my hands, then finally dialed. The seconds stretched like rubber. Finally, a woman's voice answered, calm and confident. Hello, I'm listening. Hello, this might sound like a strange call. My name is Darnell Ransom. 25 years ago, you gave birth at... Hospital name. A pause hung on the line. I could hear shuffling. A door closing. Who gave you my number? The voice hardened. I'm not a fraud, I said hastily. My wife is Candace. We also gave birth there that day. We have a photocopy of the log. You are written one line below us. I recently took a genetic test and found out my son is not my biological child. I heard a sharp intake of breath. Don't you dare call me with this, she blurted out quickly. Do you even know what you're saying? I know better than I wish I did, I replied. In that log, it was just you and us. Our son is biologically a stranger. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm only asking for one thing. Let's meet. Not for a scene, but for facts. If it's a mistake, I'll be the first to leave. There was a long silence on the other end. I thought she had hung up when I heard a quiet voice. Sometimes I thought something was wrong. My husband laughed, said I was being paranoid. I'll call you back. She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling my fingers tremble. Candace walked in, sat opposite me. She didn't hang up, I said, hoarsely. That's already a lot. I waited 2 days for a call back. I went to the plant, pretending life was normal. I argued with the younger mechanics who were too lazy to change gaskets and received parts in the warehouse. But the moment I was distracted, the photo of Ethan flashed in my mind. The coat, the house behind him, his mother nearby. I caught myself imagining him saying, Dad. These images both pulled me forward and pushed me back. The call came in the evening, when Candace and I were sitting in the living room and the TV was muttering some talk show. I immediately recognized her voice. It's me again, the woman said. I spoke with my husband, Keith. He was angry at first, but, well, if you're serious about this, we can meet. But no scenes, no cameras, no lawyers. I don't want to turn my son's life into a circus. Me neither, I breathed out. Where is convenient for you? She named a cafe in Midtown. I wrote down the address and thanked her, though there was nothing to be thankful for. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. Candace looked at me in a way she hadn't for years, not through the lens of old fights and daily routine, but just as a man standing on the edge of something terrible. Are you sure You want to go through with this?" she asked quietly. "If I don't go now," I replied, "I'll regret it for the rest of my life." At that moment, I didn't yet realize that meeting in that cafe would bring three fates together and force us all to face a choice that couldn't be ignored with money or bitterness. I arrived at the cafe early, as I always do. And honestly, I was afraid that if I stayed home until the last minute, Candace or my own thoughts would talk me out of going. I chose a table by the wall where I could see the entrance. Inside, it smelled of coffee and pastries, and quiet music was playing. People around me were flipping through menus, as if the only things on their agenda were cappuccino and cheesecake. My agenda today was to potentially meet my biological son and the woman who, 25 years ago, might have been crying in the same corridor where I was handing out chocolate bars. I ordered a regular black coffee and a bottle of water, but didn't touch either. I watched the door and mentally counted. If she comes alone, it's one conversation. If with her husband, another. If with her son, that's a whole different story. At one point, the doors opened, and I immediately knew it was them. First walked in Lauren, the woman from the photo, only older in person, with a neat haircut, wearing a dark coat. Behind her was the young man, Ethan. Tall, confident stride, the look of a person used to judging others by their clothes and watches. "Darnell?" The woman paused by the table. "Yes." I stood up. "Thank you for coming." We shook hands. Her palm was damp and cold. "This is my husband, Keith," she said, nodding at the man who followed, also in a coat, with a heavy gaze. "And this is our son, Ethan." She emphasized the word "our" as if to protect him from any claim. Ethan sat across from me, crossing his arms over his chest. "Let's get straight to the point," he said in a calm, businesslike voice. "Mom said you have some story about the hospital." I took out the photocopy of the log, placed it on the table between us, trying not to shake. I briefly explained everything: the test, the conversation with Candace, the visit to the hospital. I spoke slowly, without self-pity, as if giving a confession. While I spoke, I kept looking sideways at Ethan. He didn't interrupt, but sometimes he would clench his jaw. Keith looked back and forth between the paper and me a few times. "I'm not accusing you personally," I finished. "I just wanted to understand what happened. If this is just a coincidence, I will leave. But if on that day, through someone's fault or negligence, you and I were robbed of our children, I can't close my eyes to it." Lauren, who had introduced herself as such, stared at the table, nervously picking at the edge of a napkin. "I had a feeling something wasn't right from the beginning," she said softly. "When they brought the baby to me, I immediately told the nurse he looked different. I remembered his nose, his lips, a birthmark. But she waved it off, said I was in shock. My husband took us home and told me I was making things up," Keith grumbled. "That was no time for hysterics. The main thing was that we had a living, healthy boy. It never crossed my mind to doubt anything." "But it's crossing your mind now," Lauren added hoarsely. "When this man shows me a log where I'm written a line below his wife and says his son isn't his by the analysis, I can close my eyes all I want, but the doubt will still be there." Ethan finally spoke. "Do you understand that if this is true, you are asking me to change my entire life?" he said slowly. "I've lived 25 years with these people, calling them mom and dad. I've built plans, helped with the business, cared for my grandfather, and you, a complete stranger, walk in and say, Maybe you're not you. I nodded. I understand. I'm in the same boat. My son, the one I raised, told me yesterday that I am nothing to him. By the papers, by the test. But in my memory, he is still mine. I'm not trying to take anyone from you. I just want to know if they made fools of both of us in the same place. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the hissing of the espresso machine. I gathered my courage and said the thing I'd traveled there for. I propose we all take a combined genetic test, official. Full kit, you, your son, I, my wife, and Terrell, if he agrees. So we don't rely on guesses and memories. Keith was the first to react. Do you realize how much dirt this could bring up? If it gets out that they mixed up babies in that hospital, it'll be lawsuits, newspapers, TV cameras. My family doesn't want to live in the spotlight. Mine neither, I said. That's why I suggest we do this quietly. No reporters, no big lawsuits. Find out the truth for ourselves first, and what we do with it, we'll decide later. Lauren looked at her son. Ethan, she appealed, her voice trembling. I know you hate anything you can't control, but maybe, for me. He grimaced, but didn't shut her down like he might have. I'm a lawyer, Mom, Ethan said wearily. I know how stories like this destroy people's minds, but if we don't check, you'll never forgive yourself, will you? Lauren nodded silently. He turned his gaze to me. Fine, he said. I agreed to the test, but on 2 conditions. First, it's done officially, with documents, at a proper lab. No internet kits. Second, if the results show we all stay where we are, you stop digging up the past and never call us again. Deal? Deal? I answered without thinking. We could have parted there, but a knot remained in my stomach. I want you to understand, I said quietly, looking at Ethan. I'm not claiming the role of a new dad, even if it turns out we're closer by blood. I won't wreck your life. But knowing there's a person out there who carries my genes and doesn't even suspect it, that's worse than being poor or having a hard life. It's like walking around your house in the dark and knowing there's one more room you forgot to open. He listened, his eyes locked on mine. Beyond the irritation, something else flickered in his eyes. Not pity, but curiosity. We'll see what the lab says, he said dryly, and then we can talk about rooms. We exchanged contacts for the clinic that performed official tests and set a date. When I walked out of the cafe, the air outside felt thicker than inside. I sat down on a bench by the entrance, pulled a cigarette out of my pocket, though I'd quit years ago, and just turned it over in my fingers. Ahead of me lay not only the wait for the results, but also another conversation I couldn't avoid. The one with Terrell. He already considered me a stranger, and now I had to ask him to come and confirm it on paper. And strangely, that felt like the hardest step in the whole story. Explaining the lab to Terrell proved harder than to any of the strangers. When I returned from the cafe and told Candace about the meeting, she only curled up on the chair. He won't agree, she said immediately. You know him. I know, I replied, but if I don't ask, I'll never forgive myself. I waited for the weekend when we were all home around the same time. Terrell came out of his room for water. He was wearing sweats and a t-shirt, but even his casual movements held a certain foreign confidence, that office confidence. Son, I called. The word slipped out, even though he'd already claimed it back. We need to talk. He winced. I asked you not to call me that, he said coldly. But go ahead. You have another urgent matter? I sat down at the table, trying not to fidget, and calmly laid everything out. The meeting with Lauren, her agreement, and the date we'd set at the clinic. I told him straight, without sugarcoating. We need you to come, I finished it. It's an official test, not a home kit game. Then no one will have any questions. He listened, leaning against the doorframe, a mixture of irritation and exhaustion on his face. Do you know what you're doing? He finally said. You saw one test. It made it easier for you to blame all your failures on a swapped baby. Now you want another one to completely take the responsibility off yourself. Convenient, right? I'm not taking it off. I clenched my hands to stop from banging on the table. I admit I wasn't a perfect father, but I was a father. The night shifts, the repairs, your classes, no analysis cancels that out. Then why do you need the paper? He snapped. Aren't your memories enough for you? Candace intervened. Her voice was quiet, but sharp. Terrell, it's not just about him. It's about me, that day in the hospital. That woman. I lived with this doubt for years without even admitting it to myself. You can keep looking down on me, but this is my past, and I want to either confirm my guilt completely or finally breathe a little. He looked at her more closely than he had in the last year. You really believe there was a swap? He asked. She wiped away tears with her palm. I believe anything could have happened. I was on IVs. My head was foggy. I remember the shouting. I remember that woman. I chose not to believe myself because it was easier. And now that choice has caught up to us. Terrell gave a crooked smile and sat on the windowsill. Suppose I come to your clinic. Suppose the test shows I'm not related to either of you. Then what? You'll find the real one somewhere and start over. And who am I in your picture? A system error? You are not an error, I burst out. You are part of my life. No matter what the outcome, you are still mine. Don't say that, he cut me off sharply. Don't use those words if you don't understand what they mean. We stayed like that. Me at the table, Candace by the stove, him on the windowsill, like three strangers who happened to be in the same room. At some point, I realized that if I pushed, he would just leave, block our numbers, and disappear. I had to be honest. Listen, I said quietly. I might have screwed up a lot as a father. I didn't teach you how to talk to people or how to handle conflict without yelling. But there's one thing you definitely inherited from me. Whether you like it or not, you hate living in self-deception. You always demanded honesty about money, about our situation, about my job. Well, honesty now means the numbers in a lab report. Without them, you and I will just keep throwing assumptions at each other. He was silent, looking past me. Then he suddenly asked, and if it turns out I am your son, what then? I swallowed. Then I'll have to admit that it wasn't a swap, that you just grew up to be a person who doesn't like me. That will hurt more, but I'll accept it. And if not, then I'll know the bitterness you saw in me was misplaced, and maybe I'll stop torturing you with my presence. He smirked, but without the previous venom. Strange logic, but at least it's honest, he muttered. Fine. I'll come one time, but Dad... He bit his tongue, as if burned by the word. Darnell, after this, don't expect a hug. Clear? I just nodded. The mere fact of his agreement felt like a miracle. Candace burst into tears as if she had already heard the results. Terrell went into his room, slamming the door, but not the way he used to, not demonstratively, just to separate himself. I sat down, pulled out the small key to the lockbox where our documents were kept, and suddenly understood clearly that this was our point of no return. On the appointed day, the 5 of us showed up at the clinic. Me, Candace, Terrell, Lauren, and Ethan. A narrow corridor, white walls, the smell of antiseptic. Two completely different worlds stood side by side next to the geneticist's office. We, in our plain jackets, they, in neat, expensive coats. But everyone's face held the same tension, which couldn't be hidden by makeup or a tie. A nurse gave each of us sterile swabs and envelopes, explaining how to rub the inside of our cheeks. The procedure took a couple of minutes, but those minutes stretched into a lifetime for me. When I dropped my swab into the envelope and sealed it, it felt like I was signing off on something much bigger than just an analysis, as if I was signing an agreement to dismantle my old life, not knowing what would be built in its place. The results were promised in a few days. We were given an order number, signed the log, and walked out into the street. No one knew what to say. Lauren offered to exchange phone numbers again, just in case. Ethan only nodded at me in farewell. Terrell stood a little way off, smoking a cigarette, even though he'd quit in college. "Well, satisfied?" he threw at us when Candace and I approached. "No," I answered honestly. "I'll only be satisfied when I stop living in guesswork." He put out the cigarette without looking at me, and I suddenly caught myself with a crazy thought. No matter what verdict this lab report brings back, I still have a choice: to turn it into a weapon or into an opportunity. I didn't know then which path I would choose, but I already felt that ahead lay not only the truth, but also a price for it that no test could prepare you for. Waiting for the results was a unique kind of torture. At work, I'd turn a wrench in my hand and catch myself staring not at the machine, but at an imaginary sheet with percentages and the words "relationship excluded" or "confirmed." At home, Candace and I walked around the apartment as if it were a minefield. We were afraid to touch the subject, yet we constantly circled around it. Terrell barely spoke, only asking the date the clinic was supposed to call a couple of times, checking his calendar. In the evening, I'd reread the text from the lab 100 times. "Results are ready. Please come in person with ID." We went back, all 5 of us. The corridor was stuffy, though there weren't many people. I noticed Lauren nervously fidgeting with her purse strap. Keith kept checking his watch. Ethan stood a little apart, as if restraining the desire to leave entirely. Terrell leaned against the wall, absorbed in his phone, but I saw he wasn't reading, just staring at a blank screen. At one point, he tossed out, "If it turns out to be this swap, what are you going to do?" I sighed. "First, survive it. Then think. I'm not running to court for compensation. I want to figure out how to live with what I learn." He snorted. "Too bad you can't return it like defective merchandise." We were called into the geneticist's office one by one. A tall woman in a white coat with a neat bun flipped through a stack of papers and asked us to confirm the names and signatures were ours. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. "I will start in order," she said calmly. The comparison of samples from Mr. Ransom, his wife Candace, and Mr. Terrell Ransom showed a complete exclusion of biological fatherhood on the part of Darnell Ransom. The probability of kinship is 0%. Candace gasped and grabbed the chair. I felt simultaneously punched and freed. I had expected this, but it's one thing to assume, another to hear 0. 0 is not alike in character. It's a final period. Terrell sat motionless, only his fingers twitching on his knee. "Now the second part," the doctor continued. "Analysis of the samples from Darnell Ransom and Ethan Keith Vaugh showed a match across all tested loci. The probability of biological fatherhood is over 99.99%. She paused. "In other words, from a scientific perspective, Ethan is your biological son." The office became so quiet, I could hear a door closing somewhere in the corridor. Lauren covered her mouth with her hand. Tears flowed down her cheeks. Keith clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, as if he'd been punched in the solar plexus. I just sat, staring at the sheet where those percentages were written in black and white, feeling the world definitively shift. "Any questions?" the geneticist asked formally. I just shook my head. Of course I had questions, but none were within her area of expertise. Why us? Who had the right? The lab doesn't deal with that. And we walked out as if after a funeral. No one shouted. No one made a scene. Everyone just retreated inside themselves. In the hallway, Lauren suddenly turned to me. "So you—" her voice broke. "You're his father?" "By blood, yes," I breathed out. "By life? Not yet." "Don't say that," Keith cut in gruffly. "I raised him. I brought his fever down at night. I took him to kindergarten and soccer. Now someone else gets to call himself his father?" I looked at this man and realized we were in the same misery. We were just standing on different shores. What was supposed to be mine was taken from me, and from him, too. "No one is taking away what you had," I said, "but we all have to admit that the children we loved were under the wrong last names." Ethan, silent until then, looked up at me. "What do you want from me now?" he asked quietly, without his previous swagger. "Do you want me to hug you and say, 'Dad'? Or should I hate you for living 25 years in the wrong place?" "I have no right to demand anything from you," I answered honestly. "I don't even know how to live with this myself yet. I just needed you to know the truth. The rest is your choice." A sharp voice sounded behind me, Terrell's. "Great, isn't it?" He looked from me to Lauren and Keith. "At least you guys matched up. You can play new family, meet up, and go fishing together. And who am I? An error. A side product of this whole mess." Candace stepped toward him. "Terrell, don't say that. How else should I say it?" He pushed her hand away. "My whole life, I lived with a man who resented me for not meeting his expectations. Turns out we're not even related. And you, Mom, you walked around with your suspicion for 25 years and kept quiet. And now, there's some bonus level opening up where everyone suddenly has a real son. What do I get? A hole." His words cut deeper than the doctor's dry pronouncements. I knew we were on the brink. One false move and this would turn into a fight, shouting, tears in the clinic corridor with other people dealing with their own bad news nearby. "Terrell," I said, as calmly as possible, "you have the right to be angry. At me, at your mother, at this whole damn world. But know one thing. I'm not writing you out of my life, even if the analysis says we're strangers. If you want to leave, leave. If you want to stay, stay. But you're not an item that can be returned with a receipt." He smiled bitterly. "You're saying that because it sounds good right now. Let's see what you say when you start driving out to your shiny new son's guarded suburban community with the security gate." Lauren sobbed but remained silent. Ethan looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and fear. I suddenly imagined how he felt. The world where he was the only one suddenly had another figure in it. Me. And maybe, deep down, he was afraid I would try to take him away from his familiar home, like furniture. We separated almost silently then. We only agreed that no one would call anyone for a couple of days so everyone could process it a little. At home, Candace locked herself in the bathroom and didn't come out for a long time. Through the door, I could hear the water running, and her either washing her hands or trying to wash away her guilt. Terrell slammed his room door and put on music, drowning out everything around him. I sat in the kitchen, opened the envelope with the final report, placed the photocopy of the hospital log next to it, and realized I now had the complete set of truth. But with it lay a question on the table that couldn't be avoided. What to do with this truth? To seek revenge, sue, ruin everyone's life, or try to gather the shards into some kind of new, maybe meager, but still a future? And most importantly, was it possible to simultaneously be a father by blood to one, and not stop being a father by memory to the other, the one who had just called himself a whole? That night, after the clinic, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, staring at those 2 sheets of paper like a verdict, listening to the different lives being lived in the apartment. The water stopped running in the bathroom. Candace had stopped trying to wash away her guilt for the moment. The music in Terrell's room suddenly cut off, and the silence was so deep I could almost hear him breathing. Unread messages flickered on my phone. Lauren had written, "We need to talk. We don't understand what to do now either." I looked at the screen and didn't reply. My own internal court was in session. I saw Ethan in the clinic corridor and Terrell talking about a hole. And somewhere between them was me, the man who spent 25 years blindly believing he was a father, and who could now rely on percentages, yet still not know what was right. The next day, I still went to the plant. I wanted normalcy. The smell of oil, the clanging of the machines, the cursing in the locker room. The guys asked about football and bonuses, and I nodded without thinking. At lunch, I closed myself in the small break room, took out my phone, and while my hands automatically made a sandwich, I decided, I will not seek revenge against the hospital and the doctors. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because we couldn't handle another court case in our lives. The court had already taken place, and the verdict was on us, not them. I wrote down the points in my notepad. Hospital, a formal complaint for statistics, no drama. Ethan, give him a choice, no pressure. Terrell, don't push him away, even if he pushes me away. I met with Lauren and Keith first. We sat in the same cafe, but without the boys. She looked 10 years older. Her hands trembled as she held her cup. I thought all night, she started immediately. We can search for people to blame forever, but it won't bring back what was stolen. I know one thing. I don't want my son, our son, to live in 2 trenches. Keith nodded, though the words clearly cost him. We won't claim anything legally, he said. We have our home and business, but we can't pretend this didn't happen. He looked at me. The question is, what do you want, Darnell? I thought for a moment. You know, when I first saw Ethan's picture, something inside me jumped, I confessed. But the more I think about it, the clearer I understand. I already have experience in how not to be a father. I don't want to ram my way into his life. If he ever comes to me on his own, I'll be glad. If not, then my job now is not to destroy what you have. Lauren cried, but differently this time, as if a small bit of relief had appeared somewhere. We don't mind if you intersect sometimes, she said, little by little, without the dad or mom labels. Just meet up. I nodded. It felt painful, but right. Any attempt to snatch Ethan away from their family for my own self-interest would have turned me into the monster I always feared waking up inside me. But the conversation with Terrell couldn't be postponed. That evening, I walked into his room without knocking. Before, he would have exploded immediately. Now, he just looked up wearily over his laptop. Reading me the riot act again? No. I sat down on the chair. I don't have much talent for that, as it turns out. I came to offer a deal, I guess. He narrowed his eyes. Interesting. I'm listening. I'm not going to court, I started. I won't drag the hospital onto TV, and I won't turn this into a show. I'm not going to change your birth certificate or take away your last name unless you want me to. To me, you will remain the person I drove home from the hospital in that old car seat, the one who dropped his spoon at dinner and was afraid when I yelled. That's the truth, whether you like it or not, he scoffed. Romantic. So where's the deal? The deal is, I'll stop trying to be your father. I sighed. I won't demand calls, reports, or respect for me as a dad. If it's easier for you to think of me as an old neighbor who paid for your upkeep for years, do that. But if you ever feel bad, scared, or lonely, you can call me, not as a dad, but just as a man named Darnell who has known you since birth. And I will come. No question asked. He was silent longer than usual, then closed his laptop. And are you going to him? He asked. To this new one? If he wants to communicate with me? Yes, I answered honestly. But not instead of you. I have enough life for two, to be honest. Maybe not enough time. But I'll try. He winced, but without the former anger. Sounds pretty. Like you're going to be a good father to two people now. You're a little late, don't you think? Very late, I admitted. But that's no reason not to at least try not to get any worse. I was about to leave when he suddenly spoke. I don't know who you are to me now, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to figure it out. But your offer about calling if I need anything, I'll remember that. I don't promise I'll use it, but it's strange. Writing you off didn't get any easier. I thought it would. Those words, spoken almost in a whisper, meant more to me than any official dad. I nodded and quietly closed the door behind me. With Ethan, things were more complicated, but also more honest. He suggested the first meeting after the results, not with his parents, but with me, at a small bar not far from the Southfield office park. He arrived in a shirt, without his coat, looking exhausted. I've been living for a week like the road lines have been changed, he said without a greeting. I'm still driving by habit, but I know the signs are different. I understand, I replied. I feel the same way. He ordered a non-alcoholic cocktail. I had tea. Mom said you won't come at us with lawsuits and claims, he continued. Thanks for that. But I still wanted to ask you personally. What do you expect from me? Honestly, not those pretty phrases. I paused. I guess just one thing, I said. A chance not to be only the person who ruined your life, just by existing. You don't have to call me Dad, go fishing, or congratulate me on every holiday. Maybe just coffee sometimes. A conversation about work, about how you see the world. Not because you have to, but because it turns out we share a set of bones and blood. I'd like to know what came of it without me. He stared at me for a long time, then smiled slightly. You're strange, he said honestly. I thought I'd hear something about, I have rights, or I demand respect. But you're acting like a man, afraid to take too much. Because I've spent my whole life seeing people take too much, I replied. We sat there for almost 2 hours, talking not about jeans, but about life. He talked about his job, about how he hated pointless meetings, and I talked about the plant and the guys. Sometimes in his gestures, I caught my own habits so clearly, it was unsettling. The way he furrows his brow when he concentrates, the way he taps his fingers on the table and pauses. But I kept quiet about it. I didn't want to scare him with recognitions. As we parted, he said, "Let's meet up sometimes, without labels. If I feel crowded by all the emotions in my own family, maybe I'll text you. Don't be offended if I disappear for a long time. I haven't figured out what to do with you yet. I haven't figured out what to do with myself either." I smiled. So we're on equal footing. Several months have passed. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale, nor should it have. Candace and I started seeing a family counselor at the local clinic, learning not to turn every conversation into mutual accusations. Terrell rented a room closer to work and appeared less often, but sometimes he still called, either to pick up documents or to ask for advice on fixing a leaky faucet. We kept our talks short, without dad or son, but without the poisonous arrows either. I see Ethan every couple of weeks, usually downtown where it's convenient for him. I don't ask if he tells his parents about our meetings. I figure that's his territory, not mine. You know what conclusion I finally reached? Blood is a powerful anchor, but it doesn't always hold the boat where it needs to be. You can be related by DNA and a stranger in life, or you can live a quarter century with a person who is officially nothing to you, and still unconsciously think of him when you buy his favorite cold cuts on sale. A real father isn't made by a stamp on an analysis or a name on a license, but by whether you're willing to stay when all the circumstances are shouting, "Go away, you're the outsider here." Sometimes, sitting in the kitchen with my tea, I wonder, could I have forgiven the hospital if the mix-up had come out earlier, when the boys were little? Or would I have rushed to court with signs demanding millions in punishment? I'll never know now. But one thing I know for sure, revenge wouldn't have made any of us happier. We would have gotten headlines and news coverage, but then we'd have returned to the same apartments, only with even more broken relationships. I chose to replace the turmoil inside with a quiet, stubborn attempt to build something new from what was left. And you, if you ever find yourself facing a choice between the right to fury and the chance for fragile relationships, what would you do? Would you tear the past to shreds for the sake of justice? Or would you try, like me, to live with the truth so it doesn't become another weapon? Maybe that's the lesson. Parents aren't the ones who are flawless, but the ones who, even after failing at everything, still look for a way not to abandon their children, whether by blood or by memory. And as long as at least one person in the family is willing to choose understanding over vengeance, that family still has a future. Maybe not a perfect one, without grand words, but its own.